you've heard me talk about a lot of times not growing up in church at all, so not knowing many Bible stories. This story I actually knew about from a very young age. I was with my dad. We had left the job that they had, the company that they owned, and we had stopped and gotten gas right outside the mall there in Monroe, Louisiana. And there was a gentleman that was there who I can't remember exactly if he had gotten dropped off or someone had thrown him out of the vehicle, but he had a bag with him. And he was kind of put together, but you could also tell that life had kind of beaten him down. And he walked up to the vehicle. My dad was putting diesel in his truck. And he just said, "Sir, is there anything you can do? I'm down on my luck." I'm kind of paraphrasing the story. And I remember my dad telling me to get out of the front seat, which is a big deal because if you grew up with siblings, you know front seat's kind of a privilege. I mean, there's been a lot of great fights started over the front seat. Am I right? And he said, "Hey, son, get in the back." And I'm like, "Well, hold up a minute. I got front seat." I didn't say what I'm thinking. I didn't say that because my dad would remind me why I don't open up my big mouth and talk back to him. But so I gave up the front seat. The man's sitting in the front seat and he takes him to a place called Palms Motel. And he goes into Palms Motel and he gives the man a couple $100 cash. And he says, "I'll be back." He said, "If he needs to stay longer, I'll come and settle up and settle the account with you. Here's my number, here's my information." And we go on. And he gets back in the truck. And I got back in the front seat where my rightful place was. And I was just curious. I said, "Dad, why'd you help that guy?" He said, "Son, because in life, sometimes it beats you down. You just need somebody to help you just a little bit." And he said, the Bible has a story called the Good Samaritan. And he said, "And it's my job because I have the ability to be able to do so. There was a time in my life where I needed somebody to help me. So now it's my turn to help him." And that stuck with me my whole life. I've never forgotten it. Do you know that most all 50 states have a law called the Good Samaritan law? It's designed to encourage people to help without the fear of being sued because you stopped and helped them. Like it's to encourage people to, without hesitation, if you see a need, you can stop and meet it without the fear of being sued. Now, this situation where Jesus is teaching them this parable of the Good Samaritan, the parable it's not an actual true story. It's a fictitious story that illustrates the moral attitude or religious principle that he is trying to teach them that they need to learn. In this parable, he begins to teach them, but before he tells them the parable, this is what happens. Let's pick up in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10, verse 25. It says, "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' And he said to him, 'What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?'" Now, this is an expert in the law. For us, that would mean a lawyer. But this isn't the lawyer in the way that we understand it. He's not like a billboard on the main streets of Jerusalem trying to pick up clients. Him being a lawyer means that he is an expert in the law, meaning the 5 first books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. This is his area of expertise. This is what he is well trained in. And he is there to question him on this. But he stands up in the middle of Jesus' teaching. Now, which is crazy as well, because in those days, the teachers customarily would sit while the listeners would sit as well. And they sat all around the teachers. And if somebody had a question, a person would stand up. That was a sign of respect. In Jesus' day, while they're teaching, someone could stand up right in the middle of their address and stand right up and go, "I got a question." They wouldn't say it. They would just stand there respectfully until they called on them. I want to just say, I'm thankful that that's not the way we do it now. That'd be super awkward if everybody started standing up. "No, I got a question." "Hey, that's what you think." It'd be super, super awkward, right? Security would probably help you find your seat again. But this was common in their day. But the interesting thing here is what Luke says. He says that the man's motive was, it says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up not to ask a question, but to test Jesus. He didn't stand up out of respect for what Jesus was saying. His question was designed to try and knock Jesus down a notch or two, which is not uncommon in the Gospels anyway. And here's what verse 27 says. It says, he answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. With all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have answered rightly. Do this and you will live. See, before the second question is and why he's squirming, because you got to put yourself in this man's place, this lawyer's place, this man of the law. This man has given the right theological answers. This is what God requires. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. He's given the right theological answers. And Jesus just smiles really sweetly, pats him on the back and says, that's good, now do it. But that wasn't good enough, because his intent is not to learn. His intent is to try and have a scapegoat or to defame Jesus. And in verse 29 says, but he being the lawyer, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? He's saying to Jesus, if you're going to stipulate that I've got to love my neighbor as myself, then who's my neighbor? And in response, Jesus begins to tell this parable of the Good Samaritan as a setup to the question. And here's what the parable says. It says, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. You got to understand, as Jesus is telling this story, these are things that would mean a lot to them, but there are some things that we miss in context because that culture is not our culture. See, in first century society, it's highly structured. Different groups could be identified by the language they spoke, the dress that they wore, their accent. For example, priests often spoke Hebrew, and peasants spoke Aramaic. And along the coast, some people still spoke ancient Phoenician, but up in the north in Galilee, they spoke Greek. So government officials, emissaries of Rome, they spoke Latin. And then, of course, most of them would speak other language, but when they spoke in their different accents, it was how they could know who they were affiliated with. Like if you knew if they had some form of government relationship, or they could be identified by their accent or by what they wore, depending on what part of the country they came from. But here this man is unconscious, stripped of his clothing, unable to speak. So he, the priest, not knowing who he is, where he's from, if he is someone famous or someone rich, he just passes him by like he's a piece of trash left on the road. He sees him. Do you think the priest would have thought a little bit different if this had been a fellow priest? If he had had a priestly robe on and had been jumped and beaten and left for dead? He possibly would have responded a little different if he was a filthy rich individual, or if there was some way he could identify him. But because he's just a bleeding, half-dead carcass left on the side of the road that probably isn't going to live that long, unconscious, he passes him by. Now, you would think that these kind of things very rarely happen today. But I'll tell you, they happen a lot of times, and embarrassingly enough, they happen inside the four walls of the church as well. I was on staff at a church, and a friend of our family's, had been working for years to get an individual to come to church. And he invited his friend to church and invited his friend to church over and over and over and over again. Now, the problem with his friend is he didn't come from a very well-to-do background. He didn't look like everybody else. He didn't dress as nice as everybody else. Because, you remember back in the day when you went to church, you wore your best because you were dressed to impress for some reason. Now, I'm not saying you should dress to unimpress people, but you're just trying to make sure that you look respectable in a way. And this guy was wearing his very best when he came to church. And the crazy thing is, because I was in that season privileged to be on the platform for a long time, I was able to watch from the audience as we do the greeting time, no one spoke to this individual. And I knew in leadership, there were times when families came in that if they had a lot of money, they would make sure we target those families, but not one time did this man's name come up. Not one time. Not one time did anybody say, hey, did you? And this guy was a board member that invited him. And it broke his heart. How can the church be so numb to not notice this life that is beaten and broken coming in? But if somebody comes in that looks good and they're a healthy family, they got all this to offer, something they can give back to the church, let's make sure we pursue and run after them. Is that not crazy? Is it not crazy that there'd be special groups of people inside the church that get favoritism? That's wild to me. It's crazy. Let me tell you what it's not. It's not godly, it's worldly. It is worldly. You wanna know why it's worldly? Because it's saying, I'll do for you because you can do something for me. And that ain't the love of Jesus. I remember him being so mad, and me being a staff pastor there, I've got to go and communicate this to leadership because I'm the kind of person that I'm not gonna be affiliated with gossip, because you know what gossip is? Sharing information with someone who has no authority to do anything about it. So I take it to the leadership. And you know what? Thankfully, they learned from it. Because it would have been crazy, because I'd have had to find a new place to serve. If they'd have said, yeah, we're not worried about him. He ain't got nothing to offer us. Oh, he got something to offer Jesus because Jesus gave everything for him. But it's easy when you don't pay attention. You start looking for those that look just like you, come from the same background you do. And the truth about it is, if you look back to your broken condition, you don't look like you used to, because Jesus did a whole lot in you. And it's easy to forget where you came from and what he's done in your life. It's crazy to me that things like that possibly still happen. Do you know how much courage it takes for someone who doesn't know God to walk into a church building, especially one this size? They already think, the enemy's been screaming to them already, everybody's gonna judge you. Now, here's what we know. Nobody's judging them. Not here, right? But that's just a lie that the enemy uses to try to get them to disregard really the truth of what's gonna be preached in the house. It's all these lies that are being shouted. This guy that I'm talking about came to church that day, and everything he thought about church was proven to be true. Look, that day, our church, not this church, but the one I was on staff at, we missed it. I couldn't get off the platform quick enough to go talk to him. This is back before beards were really cool. Them big old crazy beards. Back before it was famous. To be able to get to see him and be able to get to talk to him, I wonder if because of societal pressures they feel if his wives pass by. I'm not sure, but I guarantee you if the dude had a priestly robe on, he probably would have helped him. Maybe. But if you can picture this man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, which is downhill most of the way, it's 17 miles of rugged terrain, mountainous terrain on each side. This is a place where it's common for people to be robbed and beaten anyway. This man's robbed, beaten, stripped of his clothing. He's naked and he's unconscious by the side of the road. The priest passes him on by. The Samaritan came and looked at least and passed by on the other side. But verse 33, the story takes a twist, which most of you wouldn't realize is a twist. It says, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Verse 34, so he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? I wonder if at that time the teacher of the law said, hey, that lawyer's like, I probably should have kept my mouth shut. Because there's a lot of things he could deal with, but a Samaritan being the hero of a story ain't one of them. And he said to him, he couldn't even bring it to his mouth to say the word, the Samaritan. He said, the one who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. It had to pain this Jewish lawyer to know that the hero of the story is going to be this half-breed who they think doesn't have anything together. The despised Samaritan is the one who stops. Do you know that whenever there's a need, we're always going to have opportunity and the ability to make an excuse and justify not getting involved? Like the Samaritan had every reason to say to this Jewish man beaten and left for dead, that's what you get for the way you've treated my people for years. Because you know why? That's what hate do. That's what hate will do. Hate will reproduce hate in another generation. He could have carried it forward and said, you know what? I see you hurt. And he could have went over there and kicked him one time because he got what he had coming. He could have let that hate spill over, but he didn't. Because it did not matter what background he came from, the color of his skin, what his family's name was. He was a man that was beaten and broken and left for dead, and he needed somebody to care about him. And the Samaritan said, I'm not gonna look for an excuse. I'm gonna get involved. Like if we were to simplify the story and try to put it in some modern terminology, it would be like this, like the priest would be the senior pastor, the one that everybody expects to represent God and to show compassion. And the Levite, well, you would think of like the church staff member, like a ministry leader, worship leader, or the youth pastor. Let's just pick on the youth pastors for a minute. A person deeply connected to service that you know isn't quite as established, so they could possibly get their hands dirty a little bit with someone. But the Samaritan is the person outside of known religious service with no titles. Do you see what's kind of cool here? Is if Jesus is telling the story in our world, he might say a pastor came by and kept going. The worship leader or the youth pastor came by, looked at him and kept going. But then somebody that no one else expected to do anything stopped, got down in the ditch and helped him. See, isn't it crazy that the people who knew the most about the law and loving their neighbor walked right by him? And that's what sets up Jesus' question beautifully when he said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is saying to him through this parable, stop trying to determine who qualifies for my love and become a neighbor to whoever you see that needs mercy. But here's the thing about that kind of love. That kind of love interrupts your life. Being a neighbor is inconvenient. Now, I'm not talking about where you live. It might be. It might be super inconvenient where you live to be a neighbor. But one of the strongest details in the story is the Samaritan likely used what he already had with him. It interrupted his schedule. It says he went to him and bandaged his wounds. Where did the Samaritan, where was he coming from? Where was he going? It says he went to him. The priest saw him. The Levite saw him. I mean, it could have been a whole slew of reasons that they didn't get involved. Could have been a lot of different reasons. Maybe fear, like the robbers could have still been nearby. But I don't know, many men wouldn't have been looking for a fight anyway. Right? Or maybe safety, I don't know, maybe they got another ambush. I think one of the things when I was in Bible college, when we were going through Synoptic Gospels, one of the things that was pointed out was the fact that for a priest to serve in the temple and the Levite to serve the priest, if they were to touch unclean, meaning a bloody person that was dead, they would be ceremonially unclean to serve in the temple. It could have been their religious duties that didn't allow them the opportunity to become involved. But I think there's a time where you got to look past your religious duties and you got to get your hands on some hurting. It could have been the inconvenience. Like they had a journey and a schedule to keep. And for all you timekeepers, you know how big a deal that is. Oh, they need my help. But I'm not going to be early. I'm going to be late. Well, that's why you have a telephone. You can text and say, hey, someone has a need and I'm coming. I'm going to be just a few minutes late. Maybe it's the uncertainty of going, well, or possibly, I think the easiest thing to kind of settle on is going, somebody else will handle it. See, you're always going to be able to find a reason to not get involved. But it doesn't say that the Samaritan saw him and felt bad for him. It says that he went to him. He was moved with compassion. Compassion is what makes us stop every time. The Samaritan went to him because compassion closes the distance between what you see and your involvement. And when he begins using what he has, we're not told that the Samaritan was carrying a medical kit. Look, travelers would carry commonly some provisions like oil and wine to fit the ordinary supplies, but wine would be used to cleanse a wound while oil would soothe and protect it. But where did he get the bandages? Where did the bandages come from? Jesus didn't tell us where the cloth came from. It could have been from cloth he carried, something he possibly bought for his wife to sew together. But it could have been fabric torn from his own clothing. But the picture is powerful because he didn't wait until he had everything he wished he had to help somebody. He used what he had to help the man in front of him. See, it's like that passage that Jesus is teaching them about the harvest being plentiful, but the laborers being few. He says, guys, the harvest is always going to be there. The harvest is plentiful. It is ripe. But the laborers are the issue. Never been a problem with the harvest. Look, in the broken, crazy world we live in, you don't have to travel very far to see how life has beaten someone down. Look, this kind of love interrupts your schedule. Let me tell you what else this kind of love does. It costs you. There will be costs. It says the next day he took out 2 silver coins, gave them to the innkeeper and said, look after him. And when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense that you have. He gave his time, he gave his energy, and he gave his money. He had oil, he poured it out. He had wine, he used it. He had something to bind the wound, so he bandaged him. Guess what? He had an animal, so he let him ride on it. He gave up his seat. That's that thing I struggled with as a young kid. He had time. He changed his schedule. He had money to pay the innkeeper. He had reputation. Whatever more you spend, look, you don't just take somebody's word at that. You know, it'd be like, oh, you take a check? Let's pay that sucker off. No, it was whatever more you spend, I will pay you. He must have had credit or some type of reputation. He didn't just feel compassion, he spent his compassion, and that compassion cost him something. He gets off what he is riding and puts a wounded man on his animal. In other words, he says it this way, look, man, I will walk and you can ride, because that is what ministry really is. Sometimes ministry is simply looking at somebody who's been beaten up by life and say, you know what? I'm thankful to be in the situation I'm in right now, that I've got an animal to ride and I've got provision in my life. But you know what? There was a time when I didn't. So now that I'm able to walk, I'm going to walk now so you can ride. Like, you don't have the strength to make it right now, but I do. So I'm going to help you get to where you're going. You ride for a little while I walk. And notice something else. The Samaritan had no guarantee that this man could ever repay him. Because that's the world's economy, to do good for those that can do good for you. The wounded man is unconscious, doesn't know his name, doesn't know his status, doesn't know his story, doesn't know whether he'll ever see him again. He helps someone who has absolutely nothing to offer him in return. Look, any of you ever been on that side of the story? The broken and beaten down in life? Yeah. How many of you ever been on the other side of the story when you've been able to help somebody beaten and broken down in life, right? Look, I've been on both sides. Now, I can tell you that I've never been robbed and beaten and tore my clothing and left on the side of the road dead, but I can tell you that life has been a miserable teacher through some painful lessons at times. When the people that were supposed to love me, supposed to protect me, absolutely betrayed me and left me in a place where I had no kind of oversight or no kind of help, that the ones who were supposed to set me up in life absolutely tried to destroy my life. That's why whenever I came to the Lord at 19 years old, in that short time span, I had done enough stupid all on my own. From the brokenness and all the different things that had happened, I was a broken kid that needed somebody to get me out of a ditch. Ditches are dangerous. It's where pain happens. You're not meant for the ditch, you're meant for the road. But life wants to put you in the ditches all the time. Broken, beaten down, a 19-year-old kid who would never let the world know that I was hurting, because I had to put my best front on to make it seem like nothing really got to me. But at the age of 19, whenever I became a follower of Jesus Christ, I didn't have it all together. Yes, I had a 180-degree turnaround, but there's a lot of things that come with a new believer that aren't that clean all the time. I didn't have it all together. But a man took me for a moment and said, son, I'm gonna walk while I put you on my animal and you get to ride. I'm gonna be there with you in the moments that you can't make sense of it, and I'm gonna help you in the broken moments of your life so you can learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, because life is not gonna do you any favors. I had a man spend moments, precious moments with me, that he made a sacrifice from his family so that I could have an opportunity to get to a place, and there was nothing that I could give him in return that would make sense. He just loved me. That man that spent time with me, that poured into my soul, never knew that I would become a minister of the gospel, because becoming a minister of the gospel and full-time vocational ministry was not the goal. He just wanted me to become a follower of Jesus, because if he could get me to Jesus, my life would begin to be corrected very surely, very shortly. That he would put all the broken pieces back together. But I can tell you this man that had a church smaller than the youth groups I had the privilege of leading, and our church is so much bigger than anything he's ever led. That man plays a part in every miracle story that has happened, because in a moment of brokenness in my life, he said, you ride while I walk. That's the kind of love that Jesus is trying to teach. Like when it comes to the church, you don't just love those that are lovable, you got to love the unlovable. The ones that don't look like you, the ones that don't act like you, the ones that don't believe like you. You want to know why? Because they deserve the same privilege, the privilege that you have to know a God who spoke everything else that existed. When he got ready to make man, he knelt down in the dust of the earth and he formed man in his own image, and his fingerprints are all over every life. It's the Imago Dei. God, he spoke everything else, but when he made man, he got his hands dirty with us. And for us to treat a soul like they're not worthy is not something that God's gonna wink at and act like it's no big deal. That man took a moment. He ministered to me. He didn't say, oh, I'm too busy. Because even small country churches are busy too. He said, I'm strong enough to walk, Johnny. You ride for a minute. This man took care of me. Has been there with me through the years since then. But if I can share a transparent moment with you, about 13 years ago, the ministry, the goofiness of it had taken a toll on me. At that time, I've been in full-time ministry now, pastoral ministry, for a little over 26 years. I have worked in some abusive situations, because in some situations, whenever a man thinks he has a title attached to his name, he thinks he can treat you however he wants to. That he can treat your family however he wants to. And then, you're taught things like, oh, don't touch thine anointed, or you're gonna have a curse on your life. There's like this spiritual abuse of authority that happens. And I'm trying to figure it out, because the last thing I ever wanna do is become a rebellious person that doesn't know how to honor. And so it's taking its toll. I'm working for a ministry leader who has a moral collapse 26 years in, and that gutted me, because for the first time I had a man that was loving me and supporting me and giving to me and entrusting me and empowering me, unlike anybody I'd ever had do in my ministry walk, in my ministry, if I could call it career. We get through that absolute thunderstorm of a season to walk into one of the hardest seasons we'd ever walked into. And I found myself in this season of life being beaten and broken down, but trying to do my very best to have the front on. And the truth of it is Jesus never did a thing to harm me. None of this was Jesus' fault. This was people's fault. And to wrap it up in short, I can say it this way. I had become a numb person. I was numb to the spiritual. I wasn't in grotesque sin. I wasn't looking at pornography, running around on my wife, getting drunk or drinking at all or anything like that. I was still walking right, spitting white, whatever. All them old terms we used to say. But on the inside, I was numb. I had become a man who worked for God full-time while I lived for him part-time. I didn't want to pray because I was so wounded. And Jesus hadn't done a thing, but the woundedness in my life had found me in a place where I was so broken and nobody else would know it. You know what happens whenever you're so broken is you begin to hurt the ones who love you the most. Now, I've never cussed my wife. I've never laid a hand on my wife. But at times of anger, I've said things that were definitely not godly and not building. And I remember in a moment where I was frustrated about something and I didn't know what to do, and anger is a natural response. And I know none of you have ever struggled with this, so you get to just use my example today. And I absolutely call a man who I know loves me, but I don't know what to say. And I simply told him, I said, hey, bro, I'm not in a good place at all. I'm hurt. I'm mad. I can't afford to take off. I can't. And the cool thing about it is this individual that I called had walked through a season like I was walking through years before, though he never shared it with me. Because you know the enemy's like that. He wants you to make you think that you're the only one that's ever walked through what you're walking through. The beaten down moment. And in the moment, on the phone that day, because he lives 8.5 hours away, he's a ministry friend, another pastor. He wept for me. I was so broken I couldn't even weep. I knew I needed to, but I was so hurt. And can I tell you that the moment that man took with me that day and the follow-up that he gave is the reason that we get the chance to stand on this platform today. Because there are moments in all of our lives where we need somebody that'll say, you ride while I walk. There was nothing I could do for either one of these people. Not the pastor of that small rural church, not the pastor of this big church. They didn't need me, but they loved me enough to not pass me by. Do you think Jesus ever took moments like this with his disciples? Absolutely. Simon Peter couldn't shut his big mouth. He had to rebuke him like Satan. Or what about James and John? Hey, Jesus, which side of the Lord are we going to sit on? He's like, you're still not getting it. And he gives them the example of servanthood. It's like if you want to become great, you'll become less. See, the kingdom of God is a backwards economy. To live, you have to die. To gain, you have to let go. Jesus took those moments and he taught them. He loved them even when he probably could have easily been frustrated with them. It's like, bro, I'm picking another 12. But see, this love changes lives. This kind of love changes the world. That's why he said, go and do likewise. I want you to stand to your feet with me today. Do you know that the least likely can change the world? Did you know that? The least likely can change the world. You may think, you mean somebody like me? Now, I'm not saying you're a dirty Samaritan. That's not what I'm saying. But here's what I am telling you. That you don't need a title to get somebody out of the ditch. Or if you're in the ditch today, we're here to pull you out and tell you that you can make it. You may be hurting, you may be broken, and I don't know your story, but I don't have to know because he knows. There's not a tear you've cried, there's not a moment that has passed you by that the Lord has not taken notice. God sees, I've been saying this for a while now, God sees, he knows, and he cares. He cares for you more than any human person ever could. But there are times whenever God will use a human to meet a need in your life because that's how good he is. The least likely can change it. It doesn't have to be the preacher. Pass them by, the preacher will come get them. There are people that you will reach in your life that I'll never come in contact with. You want to know why? Because it's not about titles. It's one of our core values. It's not about titles. It's about towels. I don't care what your title is. Pick up a towel and wash some feet in the name of Jesus. That's why Jesus asked the question, to whom must I be a neighbor? Look, you're either the one who's been robbed and beaten, or you're the one that's standing strong enough to be able to help somebody. Can I tell you, life can be cruel in many ways. The people you expected to help you, strengthen you, they just didn't. You've probably been betrayed at some of the deepest levels. Can I tell you, Jesus didn't do that to you. People did. Don't try and hold your love for the Lord hostage because of the condition or the way someone else treated you that wasn't Him. I have found God to be good in every season, and I have found Him to be faithful even when I was beaten down. See, if I get my eyes focused on the wrong thing, life has a way of teaching a lesson. I'm telling you today that loving your neighbor is 100% going to come at the most inconvenient moments of your life. Loving your neighbor is going to cost you something. And you know what? It should, because Jesus owns it all. Jesus can take your little and He can do much with it. Loving your neighbor can change a life. This is the kind of love that changes the world. I want everyone to bow their heads with me. Today as our prayer team comes, I'm going to invite you in just a moment. If you need prayer for any reason, physical healing, salvation. Look, I want to tell you today, first and foremost, besides anything else, the greatest miracle today that could happen is not for stage 4 cancer to disappear. It is not for someone to get up out of a wheelchair and walk again. It is not for the blind to see. It is for that soul which was far from God to be made new in Jesus' name. That is the greatest miracle in all creation. It's the only one that heaven throws a party for, because that which was lost has been found. And today, I don't want you walking out of this room ignoring that pull on your heart that says today is your day. Wherever you've been beaten, wherever you've been broken, wherever you have been crushed, can I tell you that God is more than enough to meet you where you are. And today, with every head bowed and every eye closed,